Welcome to Weathering Minds, where we discuss how the weather outside affects the weather inside your mind. I'm your host, Daisy Whittington, and today we're going to be talking about the therapeutic power of nature, which means exploring the healing benefits of connecting with nature and spending time outdoors, as well as discussing how incorporating outdoor activities and nature-based mindfulness practices can help improve our mental well-being. So, what do I mean when I say the therapeutic power of nature? That's usually how we start out this episode, with a question. Well, the answer is we're going to go over some of nature's benefits, its cognitive benefits, physical benefits, and then also how we can take that knowledge and use it in our lives to just help improve our mental health. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is the cognitive benefits of nature. So, the main theme you'll see with this is that there's an enhancement of cognitive function when you are in nature. So, exposure to nature improves thinking, reasoning, and other cognitive abilities. It is linked to better working memory, cognitive flexibility, and intentional control. That attention control is a really important factor. In fact, it's been shown that there's been many studies where kids with ADHD will be put in green spaces near their school, and they will show better cognitive development over time compared to students with ADHD who do not have these outdoor spaces accessible to them. So it's a really interesting way to see how attention control is different for kids whose minds are still developing, and I think it shows how much nature can have an impact on your mind. But it also can affect adults, as there's been studies that show adults in neighborhoods with more green space have improved attentional functioning. Another reason why nature is so good for us is that urban environments often cause a sensory overload, and they can lead to attention deficits and mental fatigue over time. Now, this brings me to Kaplan's attention restoration theory. So this was first brought about in 1989. It's a really interesting theory that suggests that mental fatigue and concentration can be improved by time spent in or looking at nature. The capacity of the brain to focus on a specific stimulus or task is limited and results in quote-unquote directed attention fatigue. So taking breaks in nature, even a simple activity like walking around, can refresh the mind and boost our creativity and our problem-solving skills. So it's a really interesting theory. Like I said earlier in my last episode, I'm going to start linking all the research I do in my description, so you can see the research papers I've read about Kaplan's theory. You can see the research papers I've read about the ADHD study. So there's just more evidence for y'all to see, because I think it's interesting, and I always think that when I'm seeing a podcast. So yeah, the Kaplan theory basically states, long story short, that mental fatigue can be improved by looking at nature or spending time in it. This also brings me to the biophilia hypothesis, if I'm pronouncing that right. And this idea was first put about by a man named Edward O. Wilson in his book he wrote in 1984 named Biophilia, if you would guess. And this hypothesis is basically that there's an innate human drive to connect with nature that stems all the way from our ancestral evolution. And it's a belief that just humans are genetically predisposed to be attracted to nature. And just it states that all humans are quote unquote inherently in love with the natural world, which I think is really interesting because it's a very, broad statement to make, to be every human is in love with nature, because I know I'm not. I'm kidding, but you know what I mean, it's a very bold statement to make, but I think it makes sense when we're looking at all this evidence of how our brain develops and how nature connects to that. But there's also a lot of physical and physiological health benefits. Being in nature can reduce your cortisol levels, muscle tension, and lower heart rate and blood pressure. Obviously, sometimes that's not a good thing, but for a lot of people it can be. Obviously, raised cholesterol, raised blood pressure can cause heart attacks, strokes, etc. So being in nature can help reduce those risks. Increased sunlight exposure outdoors boosts vitamin D levels, benefits your bones, your blood cells, and your immune system. That also brings me to just kind of making correlations between the episodes and, how the weather and mental health world are connected. Reminds me a bit, those are some of the physical benefits, but I think it was our episode 2 where we talked about sad disorder and sunshine and happiness. I think that's what the title of the episode is called, but how sunshine can have such a big impact on your mental health. But in this episode, it's interesting because we're kind of finishing that off by showing how sunlight can help you physically. Regular physical activities like kayaking, walking, hiking, biking, these can all help with also weight management and ensure overall fit and fitness. So that's another just benefit of being in nature. Nature can also enrich our emotional well-being and social connections. Now, I know this seems like a very like big statement. Again, it's like, okay, it's true, Stacey, but you got to see where I'm going. So, nature provides emotional and existential benefits beyond like cognitive advantages. And what I mean by that, it's not all okay, you're going to have better attention, you're going to have better flexibility, cognitive flexibility. Like that's not all it does. Its benefits include increased happiness, as I talked about with the Sunshine and Happiness episode, subjective well being, positive social interactions, and a greater sense of meaning and purpose in life, which kind of links back to the Kaplan's attention restoration theory that, like, looking at nature can kind of just, like, revive us, and the biophilia hypothesis that, you know, we just have that innate drive to be in nature. So I think that's also a reason, like, why a lot of studies have shown that people who spend more time in nature have kind of a greater sense of self and a greater sense of purpose in life. Nature exposure is linked to reduced mental distress and a lower risk of psychiatric disorders. And there's a really interesting study that they did in Denmark that found like children who grew up with more green space had a reduced risk of mental illnesses later in life. Now I know this sounds similar to the one I said earlier about ADHD, but in that one it was more of a like control group situation where they wanted to see, okay, these kids have ADHD, let's see how they work with more green spaces. And so that was more of a specific one. This is just as interesting. It's just showing over, you know, however many years that these children had a significant reduced risk of mental illnesses later in life. Nature can also change our social behaviors. It can enhance them. It can enhance our social cooperation. Experiments show that individuals exposed to nature scenes are more likely to cooperate in resource management games or just be like less controlling, bossy. Not that that's always a bad thing, but there's been studies shown that that's true. And also, when I say there's been studies shown, you know, I try to keep the podcast concise, 10 to 25 minutes. If I say studies shown, I'm going to have that linked in my bio, as I said earlier, because I don't have time to read off like every source. So if you find, okay, that study sounded interesting, go to my bio and you'll be able to find the works cited page where I will have all the links if you're like interested in a certain part. There's also, so okay, now we've learned about all the benefits, but what are some ways people have taken like this known information and shifted it to like taking it for their advantage? So one way of doing this is forest bathing and nature therapy. So you might be thinking, what is forest bathing? Hello? So walking slowly in nature, like a very slow progression, you don't have a place where you're just kind of like taking in the scenery, can be known as forest bathing, quote unquote. And there's a lot of studies that there's a lot of studies that show that it can significantly lower anxiety, improve your mood, and boost your immune system. Numerous studies also support the mental and physical health benefits of forest bathing. So obviously, like, going through actual nature is going to be a better option, but you can also view nature through videos and images, through VR experiences, and these can also be beneficial, which may sound silly, but it really is true that even if you're just like looking at trees or, you know, whatever you consider nature, like that can also have a big impact too. And beyond time spent outdoors, feeling connected to nature can be very crucial for our mental health. This connection, referred to as quote unquote nature relatedness, or connectedness to nature, positively affects our mood and mental well-being. Our proximity to nature can mitigate the negative effects of social isolation, which I think is a really good point. I think, you know, people sometimes say this place is my escape. It's a really good way to just kind of like take your mind out of where you are and just like focus on the beauty of the outdoors and like our nature in our world. So two or three things I wanted to bring up are some of the really cool community and policy initiatives that are happening right now to take all this cool information and they're like using it for the good of their community. So one is Pennsylvania's statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, also known as SCORP. The SCORP aims to increase access to outdoor recreation across Pennsylvania, and they're going to utilize parks, forests, trails, rivers, lakes, and game lands to just have this a lot more access to diverse communities in Pennsylvania, including multicultural and LGBTQ groups. So I think that's really cool because it's been going on for 4 years now, since 2020. I think that's super admirable. They started that in COVID. As you know, in our COVID episode, shameless plug, it was a very hard time for a lot of people, and being able to do that is super cool. But yeah, it aims to increase access to these outdoor areas, but specifically for people and misrepresented groups such as, people of color, LGBTQ people, and so on. Another really cool one is please forgive my pronunciation, the Susquehanna Greenway Partnership. A really cool thing about this is like a 500-mile corridor, and it plans to grow new trail segments and boat launches to enhance access to outdoor spaces. So the Greenway aligns with SCORP's goals to make outdoor spaces more accessible within 10 to 15 minutes of residence homes. So it's kind of like saying there's a lack of nature trails near people's residency, so they're trying to make it more accessible, which actually makes me think of I'm literally thinking of this on the spot. I don't even have a script for this, but in a class I took, we learned about food deserts, which were areas where they won't have grocery stores for at least 3 miles, and they're usually in less fortunate people of color, just underrepresented group areas. And they were called food deserts because they had no way of getting, food within their mileage if they don't have a car, which most of them don't. And people came together to, build grocery stores, build whatever, aid in the money for transportation to go to these grocery stores so the people in these communities could get food. This is, I think, kind of correlated to that, the Greenway Partnership of SCORP is trying to make these outdoor spaces more accessible to people who don't have that opportunity. And speaking of the pandemic and what SCORP did during 2020, the pandemic underscored the importance of accessible open spaces for personal and community health. I think we can all agree, at least for me, that during COVID, that was the longest I had ever been outside. I would stand outside every day with my parents, watching the world go by. And yeah, I think the pandemic really did underscore how important it is for all of us to just have that space outside where we can go. Which is why more and more places are increasing the awareness of the role of nature and promoting health and well-being. Another really cool initiative is the Dauphin County Parks and Recreation Program. Yes, Parks and Recreation is real. I didn't know that for a bit after watching Parks and Recs the show. But they have programs like outdoor walks, art, yoga, forest bathing sessions, which I think is really cool, and meditation to show the diverse ways that we can engage with nature for health benefits. So again, that's a really cool way that I feel they're taking both the mental and physical parts of nature and combining it to just benefit our community. And yeah, that is the main things we're going over today. It was a pretty straightforward episode, obviously, but I think it's really interesting how many wide-ranging benefits there are to nature for cognitive, physical, emotional, and social health. I encourage y'all to spend time in nature, support your community and policy efforts to make nature more accessible to everyone. And yes, thank you so much for watching. Please tune in next month for our next episode, and thank you so much.